The gavel came down twice. "Take it off, right now." Judge Everett Sloan did not raise his voice so much as sharpen it. Below the bench, Claire Donnelly stood at the witness stand, in a faded olive field jacket, the left sleeve darkened where blood had soaked through and not yet dried. She did not move. She did not answer. She only set both hands flat on the wooden rail. Out in the corridor, the courtroom door hung half open. A silver-haired man in Navy service whites was walking past. He stopped not for the shouting, but for what he saw on her shoulder. A rectangle of cloth darker than the fabric around it, where a patch had once been cut away. Beneath it, faded ballpoint ink written by hand, P4/11 November. He had signed that order himself. Subscribe and stay with this one. The emergency department at Pacific Mercy kept its thermostat at 64 degrees, and by the 31st hour of her shift, Claire Donnelly had stopped noticing the cold entirely. Everyone else noticed. The residents worked in fleece under their scrub tops. The night clerk kept a space heater under her desk that facilities had confiscated twice. Claire wore an olive field jacket sleeves down to the wrist and had worn it on every shift for as long as anyone there could remember. The pileup on Interstate 5 had come in at 11 the previous night. 7 vehicles, a jackknifed box truck, 1 lane of southbound traffic turned into something the paramedics described over the radio in short, flat words. Trauma 1 and Trauma 2 had been full since midnight. By 3 in the morning, the department had that particular quality it got when everyone had been working too long, quiet, efficient, slightly underwater. Dana Whitfield had been a nurse for 11 months, and this was the worst night she'd had. She was restocking a suture cart when she asked, because she had been wanting to ask for weeks, and exhaustion had finally worn the politeness off her. "Can I ask you something? You're always in that jacket, even in July." Claire was writing on a chart. She did not look up right away. "It's cold in here." "It's not that cold." "It's cold enough." Dana let it go and then didn't. "The sleeves, though. You keep them pulled all the way down, even when you glove up." This time, Claire did look at her, and there was nothing unkind in it at all. "The patients are scared enough already," she said. "They don't need anything else to look at." She went back to the chart. Dana stood there holding a fistful of sutures and understood that the conversation had ended, and also that she had not really been told no. At 3:15, dispatch called ahead with something that had nothing to do with the freeway. The ambulance came in hot. Male, early 20s, unresponsive airway, compromised blood in the airway, not from a crash, the medic said, from a fall. Blunt trauma to the back of the head, posterior scalp laceration, and the patient had aspirated before anyone got to him. Somebody at the scene had already established an emergency airway. The medic said it in a strange tone, half a question. "Established it with what?" Claire asked. "That's the thing," the medic said. "Barrel of a ballpoint pen." They moved him into Trauma 3. He was young, well-dressed, under the mess, the kind of jacket that cost more than a week of Claire's pay. She got a hand under his jaw and worked, and around her the room did what it did. Lines, monitors, the respiratory therapist's voice counting. She reached for the trauma shears and started cutting the jacket away from his chest collar to hem, and something heavy came loose in the fabric and hit the tile floor. It was a bright, specific sound. Metal on ceramic. Everyone in the room heard it. "Hold," Claire said. She looked down. A folding knife lay against the leg of the gurney, closed, the handle worn smooth, a blade maybe 4 inches, when it was open. It had been in the interior chest pocket of his jacket, and the shears had opened the pocket, and gravity had done the rest. She did not touch it with her hands. She finished securing the airway first, because the airway is always first, and then she called for the charge nurse and a specimen bag, picked the knife up with a pair of long forceps, and dropped it in. Personal property removed from a patient's clothing during resuscitation goes into a property log. It is not a dramatic document. There is a line for the item, a line for the time, a line for the person who took possession of it, and a line for the signature of that person, and Claire filled all 4 of them out standing at the counter with her gloves still on. 3:40 in the morning. C. Donnelly, RN. She locked the bag in the property cabinet, and by 4, the young man had a surgical airway and a bed upstairs and a name on the board. Trevor Langston. The name meant nothing to her. She had lived in San Diego for 6 years and had never once opened the business section. Later, reaching across the bed for a clamp on a different patient, her left sleeve slid back past the wrist. It was gone in under a second. She had the cuff in place again before she'd finished the motion, the way a person does something they have done 10,000 times. Dana Whitfield was standing on the other side, and she saw, and she looked away so fast and so deliberately that Claire knew she had seen. Neither of them said anything about it. They had 4 hours left. 25 minutes before the ambulance in the service alley behind a diner on 4th Page Moreno had been taking a bag of trash to the dumpster at the end of her shift. There were 3 of them, and afterward she could not describe any of it in the right order, only that one of them took her wrist and turned her toward the wall, and that the one in the expensive jacket had a knife out and open, and that he was smiling in a way that had nothing behind it. Mason Keene was walking home from the loading dock at the produce terminal where he worked graveyards. He came into the alley from the 4th Street end, and he did not shout, and he did not announce himself. What happened next took under 10 seconds. He took the knife hand first, folding it inward against the wrist. The second man he put into the dumpster's side hard enough to end his interest. The third ran. Not one of them was struck in the face. Later, this detail would matter more than anything else in the case, and at the time, nobody thought about it at all. Trevor Langston went down backward off the curb and hit the base of the wall with the back of his head, and the sound he made after that was wet and wrong. Blood from the scalp and from his nose was running the wrong direction. Within 20 seconds, he had stopped moving air. Mason picked the knife up off the asphalt, folded the blade closed against his thigh, and pushed it into the inside chest pocket of the man's jacket. It was not a decision so much as a reflex. There were 2 other men in that alley, one of them still conscious, and both of his hands were about to be occupied, and you do not leave a live weapon lying loose on the ground behind you. Then he knelt over the man who had just tried to cut him and took a ballpoint pen out of his shirt pocket. He pulled the cartridge out with his teeth. He found the notch below the cricoid with 2 fingers, opened it with the small folding blade on his keys, and seated the barrel. He was still holding it in place, still counting under his breath, when the first patrol car came down the alley with its light bar going. They cuffed him in that position. Page Moreno was screaming at them that they had the wrong man. Nobody wrote it down. A week is not a long time, but it is long enough. By the following Monday, the knife had ceased to exist. The scene report filed at 2:58 that morning listed no weapon recovered. Page Moreno had given a statement on the night of, and then, after a telephone call, she would not describe to anyone had asked to withdraw it. And Mason Keene, who had no record, who had 11 years in and a discharge with an honorable characterization, who had spent $400 he did not have on a deposit for an apartment he had not yet moved into, had become, in the language of the filing, a disturbed veteran with a history of combat service who attacked an unarmed young man without provocation. The public defender assigned to him was named Ruth Alvarado, and on Wednesday afternoon she called Pacific Mercy and worked her way down through 3 departments before somebody in medical records told her what she already suspected. She reached Claire at 4 o'clock in the staff lounge on the 6th day after the alley. "There's a property log," Alvarado said, "from the night he came in. It's got a folding knife on it taken off his clothing during the resuscitation. It's still in your evidence cabinet. It never went to the police because nobody ever asked for it." "That's right. There's one signature on that log, and it's yours. You're the person who took possession. Nobody else can put that knife in his pocket. Not the charge nurse, not the doctor. You." Claire stood at the window of the lounge with the phone against her ear and looked out at the parking structure. "I'd also need you as an expert," Alvarado said. "On the airway, on the wrist. There's an orthopedic finding in the radiology report that nobody has explained, and I don't have a witness who can explain it and also put the knife in the room. You're both. You'd need my credentials in the record." "Yes." All of them. There was a small delay on the other end. Your service record would come in, yes. Not the operational detail, the court can't compel that, but your training, your unit, your rating. It goes into the transcript, and the transcript is public. Claire said she would call back. She did not call back for 2 hours. She sat in the locker room on the bench with her forearms on her knees in the fluorescent light in front of an open locker that held one clean set of scrubs, a pair of running shoes she never used, and the field jacket on a bent wire hanger. For 8 years, no one at Pacific Mercy had asked her a single question about the Navy. She had built that. She had built it deliberately, the way you build anything out of 1,000 small decisions, the long sleeves, the shift trades, the way she moved a conversation along when it got near. It was not shame. She wanted to be very clear with herself about that sitting there. It was not shame. It was that she had found a place where she was simply the nurse who was good at airways, and she had wanted to keep it. Testifying meant the end of that. It meant that on Monday morning, the people she worked beside would know, and that after they knew, they would look at her the way people look. She thought about a man kneeling in an alley with a pen barrel in his hand, holding open the throat of the person who had just tried to open his. She stood up and took the jacket off the hanger and put it on. Friday came fast. The preliminary hearing was calendared for 1 PM in Department 2C, and Claire's shift ran until 11, and then it ran until 11:30, because a woman came in with an upper gastrointestinal bleed, and there was no version of Claire Donnelly that walked out of that room. She signed out at 11:52. The left sleeve of the jacket was soaked from cuff to elbow and had gone dark, and there was no time and no clean shirt in the locker, and no version of the afternoon in which she stopped to find one. She got to the courthouse at 12:20 and came through the metal detectors into a lobby full of people and past the calendar board on the wall without slowing down. The board listed the afternoon's proceedings in white plastic letters, department by department. Department 4, B. Personal Injury, Rourke versus Meridian Freight Witness Administrative C, Barrett, U.S. Navy. She did not read it. She was looking for 2C. Some help arrives without a word attached to it. A man kneels in an alley and does not stop to explain himself to anyone. A woman takes a jacket off a hanger and puts it on and tells no one what it is going to cost her. The kindness that lasts is rarely the kind that speaks. Department 2C was on the 3rd floor at the end of a corridor with tall windows on one side, and it was smaller than Claire had expected. Preliminary hearings do not require a jury box. There were 4 rows of public benches, a low wooden rail, 2 counsel tables, and above them the bench itself raised enough that everyone in the room had to look up. Ruth Alvarado met her at the door with a folder under one arm and did not comment on the sleeve. Whatever she thought, she filed it somewhere and kept moving. Mason Keene was already at the defense table in a county jumpsuit, hands folded in front of him, sitting the way men sit when they have taught themselves not to take up room. He turned his head when the door opened. He saw the jacket first, and then he saw her face, and something went across his expression that Claire could not read from that distance, and did not have time to. In the back row alone, a young woman in a waitress's cardigan sat with a folded envelope in her lap. In the first row behind the prosecution table, a man in a charcoal suit sat with his hands on his knees. He was somewhere past 60 silver at the temples, and he had the stillness of a person who has spent decades in rooms where other people did the talking. He did not have a legal pad. He did not have a phone out. He watched the front of the room the way a man watches a machine he owns. Alvarado leaned in close enough that only Claire heard it. "That's Harrison Langston, Trevor's father. He hasn't said one word in this building all week, and every single thing that's happened has his fingerprints on it." Claire looked at him for exactly as long as it took to understand him, and then stopped looking. The bailiff called the room to order at 1:04, and Judge Everett Sloan came in through the door behind the bench. He had 19 years on this calendar, and he ran it the way a man runs something he has stopped finding interesting. He did not look at the gallery. He sat, adjusted the microphone, and began, and the first hour went quickly. The prosecution's first witness was the attending physician who had taken over Trevor Langston's care upstairs after the surgical airway was secured. He was a tall man in a gray suit named Prescott, and Sloan addressed him as Doctor from the first syllable before a single credential had been stated, before anyone had asked him where he went to school. Prescott testified for 20 minutes about the head injury, the surgical airway, and the 8 days of recovery that had followed. He was not asked how the airway had first been established in the field because the prosecution's questions did not go there, and when he was offered for cross-examination, Alvarado asked him nothing at all. She had a better witness coming, and she did not need him. The prosecution rested its medical presentation, and Alvarado stood and called Claire Donnelly. She came through the gate and up to the stand and was sworn, and she stood there in the field jacket with her hands at her sides. Sloan looked at her for the first time. "Miss Donnelly, Your Honor." He nodded once without any particular acknowledgement and glanced down at the paper in front of him. "You're a nurse." "Registered nurse. Emergency Department, Pacific Mercy." "How long?" 8 years there, 14 total. "And you have what an associate's a 2-year program, Bachelor of Science in Nursing, Your Honor. I also hold certification in advanced trauma care, and I'm credentialed in advanced airway management at my facility." "Where did you train? Naval Hospital Corps School, and then the Fleet Marine Force program at Camp Pendleton. My civilian degree is from San Diego State." Sloan wrote something. "So you were a medic?" "A corpsman, Your Honor." "And you consider yourself qualified to offer an opinion on emergency airway procedures?" Alvarado was halfway to her feet. Claire answered before she got there. "I've established more than 200 emergency airways, Your Honor. I don't know how many of them I'd be able to count if you asked me to. I stopped counting somewhere around the first 100. Prescott, who had not been asked a single one of these questions, sat in the gallery and studied the floor. Sloan set down his pen. He had, in fact, been looking at the jacket for several minutes. It had been sitting at the edge of his attention like a stain on a tablecloth, and now that the witness was talking, he found he could no longer look at anything else: the frayed cuff, the cutaway rectangle on the shoulder, the left sleeve, which was not quite the same shade of olive as the rest of the coat and had been set into the shoulder seam by hand in small, uneven stitches by somebody working without a machine. And below the elbow of that sleeve, the dark patch where something had soaked through this morning and was still tacky at the cuff. "Miss Donnell, what is that you're wearing?" "Donnelly, Your Honor, it's a jacket." "This is a courtroom, not a bus station. I don't permit street clothing at that stand, and I certainly don't permit—" He moved 2 fingers in the air, indicating the sleeve. "Whatever that is, it's filthy. Take it off." "I came off shift at 11:52 this morning, Your Honor. I came directly here. I didn't have time to change." "Then you should have made time. This court is not going to sit here and look at that." "I understand it isn't ideal. It's contemptuous." That word landed in the room and stayed there. "Ms. Donnelly, I am going to say it one more time, and then I am going to hold you in contempt, and you will spend 48 hours in county custody thinking about the dignity of this institution. Take it off." The gavel came down twice. "Take it off, right now." And Claire Donnelly did not move, and did not answer, and only set both hands flat on the wooden rail in front of her. Out in the corridor, the door of Department 2C hung half open. The bailiff had propped it when the room got warm and had not closed it again. A silver-haired man in Navy service whites had come out of Department 4B at the far end and was walking back toward the elevators with a folder under his arm and his cover in his hand. He had spent 40 minutes that afternoon testifying about a corporal who had been on his staff, which was not the kind of thing that ordinarily required an admiral, and he had gone anyway because there are things you do. He stopped in the doorway, not for the shouting. He had heard men shout before. He stopped because of a shoulder, because of a rectangle of darker fabric where a patch had been cut away a long time ago with a seam ripper and patience, and because he knew that shape. He took one step into the doorway to be sure, and then he saw the ink along the edge of it bled into the weave and faded down to almost nothing, and he was sure. He had signed that order. He had signed it at 0400 with a pen that kept skipping in the cold, and he had not slept well any November since. He did not go in. Not yet. Inside, Sloan raised 2 fingers toward the back wall. Bailiffs? They came forward from either side, and they were not unkind about it. They were 2 men in their 40s doing a thing they had been told to do, and one of them said, "Ma'am," in the way you say it when you would prefer not to be there. Claire turned to face them. She did not step back. She did not raise her hands. What she did was straighten heels, together weight, even shoulders squared, chin level, and it happened in under a second. And it was not something anyone learns in an emergency department. Whatever it was old, and it was underneath everything else she had been doing for 8 years, and it came up through her like water finding a crack. "Don't touch me," she said. She said it quietly. She said it at a volume meant for 2 people and no one else, and it carried anyway the way certain things do. Both bailiffs stopped. Neither of them could have explained it afterward. There was nothing threatening in it. There was no anger in it at all. It was simply the voice of someone who had been in worse rooms than this one and had come out, and the body knows that sound before the mind gets a vote. Sloan sat back in his chair. He watched the 2 men stand there and did the arithmetic wrong the way people do. He saw a woman in a ruined coat who had made a small dramatic stand and had gotten her way for 11 seconds, and he saw 2 bailiffs being soft, and he decided that this was a stubborn person who did not understand where she was. "You're wasting this court's time," he said. "Sit down, gentlemen." They went back to the wall. "Ms. Donnelly, let me explain the situation you have put yourself in, because I don't think you grasp it. I have discretion over the conduct of proceedings in this department. That includes the appearance and comportment of witnesses. If you will not comply with a direct instruction from this bench regarding your appearance at that stand, then I will not receive your testimony. I will strike everything you have said and everything you were going to say, and this hearing will proceed on the record that remains." He let that sit for a moment. "Do you understand what that means?" She understood exactly what it meant. It meant that a property log signed at 3:40 in the morning would sit in a locked cabinet at Pacific Mercy and never be spoken of in this building. It meant a folding knife with a 4-inch blade would go on not existing. It meant that a spiral fracture in a young man's wrist would remain in the record, an unexplained radiology finding. It meant that a man who had knelt in an alley and breathed for someone would be bound over for trial and would very probably be convicted, because juries do not like the phrase combat veteran when it is placed beside the word unprovoked. It had stopped being about a jacket somewhere in the last minute, and everyone in the room could feel that it had. She turned her head toward the defense table. Mason Keene was looking straight at her, and he shook his head barely twice the smallest motion a person can make and still mean it. His mouth formed one word without any sound in it: don't. He knew. That was the terrible part. He had never once asked her, and she had never once told him, and he knew anyway. 8 months earlier, at the Veterans Center on Grape Street, Claire had gone to a Thursday evening group because a physician she respected had asked her 4 times, and she had run out of ways to say no. She had sat in a molded plastic chair at the end of the second row and had said nothing for 90 minutes. The room was hot. There was no air moving in it at all, and after an hour her left arm had started to do what it did in heat. The grafted skin does not sweat, it has no glands in it, and the heat has nowhere to go, and the whole limb goes tight and hot and begins to ache from underneath. She had pushed her sleeve up 2 inches. 2 inches no more, and she had put her hand flat on the cold metal chair leg beside her. The man in the next chair had not looked over. He had reached into the bag at his feet, taken out a bottle of water still cold from somewhere, and set it on the floor between them, and then had gone back to looking at the front of the room. He never said anything. He never asked. She had taken the bottle and held it against the inside of her forearm for the rest of the hour, and when the group broke up, he was already gone. She had learned his name months later in a case file from a public defender on a telephone. Don't he said now from a county jumpsuit with a 19-year man on the bench about to take away the only thing that could save him. The air went out of the room. Alvarado had one hand on the table and had gone very still. In the back row, the young woman in the cardigan sat with both hands over her mouth. It was the moment when everyone present privately understood that the witness was going to step down and that this was going to be one of those hearings that people forget by Tuesday. Claire Donnelly reached up and took hold of the zipper at her collar. The sound of it coming down was the only sound in Department 2C. She did the left arm first, and she did it slowly, because raising the left arm above the shoulder had been a negotiation every morning for 8 years, and this morning was no different. The sleeve came off the wrist and turned partway inside out, and she straightened it with 2 fingers. Then the right. She folded the jacket in half and then in half again and set it squarely on the corner of the witness rail like something being returned to its owner. Underneath, she wore a short-sleeved scrub top the color of dishwater. The burn started somewhere under the left side of the collar and came down over the shoulder and the whole of the upper arm and past the elbow, and it did not stop until the wrist. It was old years old, settled the angry color long gone out of it, and it was a landscape. Graft margins ran across it in long, pale seams, where donor skin had been laid down in sheets, each sheet a slightly different shade, the mesh pattern still faintly visible in places like the print of a screen door. Along the inside of the elbow, the tissue was drawn tight and shining, and the arm did not extend the last 15 degrees, and everyone in the room could see exactly why. On the inside of her right forearm, where the skin was her own, there was a tattoo. A trident drawn plainly no larger than a thumb. Beneath it, 4 short horizontal marks in a row. The ink had gone soft and blue-gray with age. It had been put there by somebody who was not very good at it a long way from anywhere, and it had never once been intended to be looked at by strangers. Judge Everett Sloan opened his mouth. Nothing came out of it. Claire looked up at the bench, and her voice was perfectly level. "It's off, Your Honor. May I testify now?" The door at the back of the courtroom opened. Admiral Conrad Barrett came 4 steps up the center aisle in service whites and stopped, and he did not look at her face. He looked at the left arm, and he read it the way a man reads a page he has read before, and then he read the folded jacket on the rail. "Phantom 4, he said. It was not a question, and he did not put it to anyone in particular. Then he came to attention in the middle of the aisle of a county courthouse, and he raised his right hand and held a salute, an admiral in whites to a civilian standing at a witness stand in scrubs. He held it until she returned it, which took her a moment because it had been a long time. Sloan found his voice. "Sir, you cannot, this is a closed proceeding, you cannot simply—" "My name is Conrad Barrett. I'm a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy, and I've been in Department 4B since noon." He lowered his hand. "I'd ask the court's indulgence for 90 seconds, and then I'll take a seat like anybody else." Whatever Sloan had been about to say, he did not say it. Barrett turned back toward the front of the room, but he was speaking to the bench. "In November of a year, I'm not going to name in this room, I signed a withdrawal order for a team operating in the mountains of eastern Yemen. I signed 4 casualty notifications the same hour because that was the arithmetic I had in front of me at the time, and I was not wrong about the arithmetic." His voice did not change at all. "Those 4 notifications were never sent. That is entirely because of her." He nodded once toward the folded jacket on the rail. "Her record sits at a classification level this court cannot compel and I will not discuss. But that coat I can speak to. That coat is what she has left. Everything else she owned was on the aircraft, and the aircraft burned. So did most of that sleeve. Somebody sewed her a new one out of a dead man's field jacket in a tent in Djibouti, and she has worn it every day since." He walked to the end of the second row and sat down. In the first row on the other side of the aisle, Harrison Langston had not moved and had not changed expression, but he had at some point in the last 2 minutes taken his hands off his knees. There is a bitter truth in all of this, which is that people find it easier to believe a report that has been printed flat and stapled square than to listen to the scars of someone who has actually been there. A clean document feels like authority. A damaged arm feels like a story someone is telling you. But the truth has never once needed an expensive suit in order to be true. She hid that arm for 8 years, and not out of shame. She hid it because she did not want anyone to have to look at it, because in a room full of frightened people, she had decided her job was to be the calmest thing present. And then one afternoon she set the coat down. Not to prove who she was, not to win an argument with a man on a bench. She set it down because a man in the second row was going to prison if she didn't. Scars don't tell the story of how a person fell. They tell the story of who that person carried out. Claire sat down in the witness chair. There was no sleeve to pull now. The arm rested on the arm of the chair in full view of the room, and after the first minute, nobody in Department 2C was looking at it anymore, which was a thing she had not expected and did not have time to think about. Ruth Alvarado came out from behind the defense table with a legal pad she never once looked at. "Ms. Donnelly, I want to start with the airway. You've heard testimony this afternoon about a surgical airway placed at the hospital. I want to ask you about the one placed in the alley." "All right. In your professional opinion, what does it take to open a person's airway in the field with the barrel of a ballpoint pen?" "It takes about 40 seconds of hands that don't shake." "Explain that for the court." Claire turned slightly toward the bench because that was where the answer needed to go. "You're working on a body that's already fighting you. He's hypoxic, so he's seizing, or he's close to it and he's moving. You have to find the cricothyroid membrane by feel. It's a soft notch under the thyroid cartilage, and on a young man with muscle in his neck, it's about the width of your fingernail. You have to make an opening in it without going too deep, because the esophagus is directly behind it, and if you go through, you've killed him. Then you have to seat the tube and hold it. And holding it is the part nobody talks about. If you let go, the tissue closes and you've done it for nothing." "How much light was there in that alley?" "None that would matter. Whatever came off the street." "And in your experience, Ms. Donnelly, what is the mental state of a person who does that successfully, extremely controlled? Can a person do that while out of control, while in the grip of a psychiatric episode or a rage or a flashback?" "No." "You're certain?" "I've watched trained providers fail that procedure with a full trauma team around them and the lights on because their hands were going. It is the least forgiving thing I know how to do." She let her eyes go to Sloan and stay there. "The prosecution's theory is that this man lost control, but a man who has lost control cannot save anyone. The man who saves someone is the man who never lost it in the first place. Those two things cannot occupy the same 40 seconds. They are opposites." Sloan had not written anything for several minutes. "Ms. Donnelly," Alvarado said, "I want to move to the wrist. There's an orthopedic finding in Trevor Langston's radiology report that nobody in this hearing has addressed. Are you familiar with it?" "I am." "Distal radius right arm. It's a spiral fracture." "Explain the significance of that." "A spiral fracture isn't an impact injury. You don't get one from falling, and you don't get one from being struck. It comes from torsion rotational force. The bone twists until it fails along a helix." "What produces that force in a forearm?" "Something has to hold the far end still while the near end turns. In the wrist, the far end is the hand." Claire set her own right hand on the rail in front of her, palm down. "If the hand is open and empty and you rotate the arm, the hand simply follows. The wrist gives. You may get a sprain. You don't get a spiral fracture because there's nothing anchoring the distal end. And if the hand isn't open, then the hand is a fixed point. If the fingers are closed around an object and the grip is maintained through the rotation, the forearm has nowhere to go and the radius takes the entire load. That is a disarming injury. It's one of the most specific findings in the report." Alvarado let 5 full seconds go by. "Ms. Donnelly, in plain language, what does that fracture tell you?" "That he was holding something." She was speaking to the bench again. "And that when someone turned his wrist to make him let go of it, he didn't let go. The bone broke first." Somewhere in the gallery, a man cleared his throat and it sounded very loud. Your Honor, Alvarado said, defense moves to admit Exhibit D, a Pacific Mercy Hospital patient property log entered at 3:40 in the morning on the 14th. The prosecutor rose. Marcus Corbett had tried felonies in this building for 12 years and had a reputation as a man who did not overreach, and he had been growing quieter at his table since roughly the time the jacket came off. No objection, he said. Sloan looked at him for a moment before he took the document. Ms. Donnelly. Alvarado said, would you describe for the court what that log is? It's the form we complete when we remove personal property from a patient during a resuscitation. Anything that comes off the body or out of the clothing. It has 4 entries, the item, the time, who took possession of it, and the signature of the person who took possession. How many signatures are on this one? 1. Whose? Mine. Would you read the item line? Claire did not need the document in front of her to do it, but Alvarado handed it up anyway, and she read it. Folding knife blade approximately 4 inches recovered from the interior chest pocket of the patient's jacket during removal of clothing. 3:40 in the morning. C. Donnelly, R.N. Describe the circumstances. I was cutting his jacket off with trauma shears. I opened the pocket without knowing it was there, and the knife fell out onto the floor. It made a very distinct sound. Everyone in that room heard it. There were 6 of us. I finished the airway first. Then I picked it up with forceps, bagged it, logged it, and locked it in the property cabinet. Where is that knife right now, Ms. Donnelly? In the evidence cabinet at Pacific Mercy. It's been there for 8 days. It was never transferred to the San Diego Police Department. No. Was it requested? No. Nobody called. Nobody came. Alvarado turned toward the bench and did not raise her voice at all. Your Honor, the scene report filed at 2:58 that morning states that no weapon was recovered. That statement is accurate. The weapon wasn't recovered at the scene because by 2:58, the weapon was in an ambulance inside a jacket on its way to a hospital where a nurse cut it out of the lining and signed for it 42 minutes later. She set a second folder on the clerk's ledge. It never disappeared, Your Honor. It was never lost. It was simply left out of the file. And there is one more thing. Go on, Sloan said. Trauma Bay 3 at Pacific Mercy has a ceiling-mounted security camera. Hospital Council has preserved the recording. At 3:38 in the morning, that camera records an object falling from the patient's clothing to the floor, and it records Ms. Donnelly stopping the procedure to identify it. The defense has the file. The people have had a copy since 9 o'clock this morning. Harrison Langston in the first row looked at the back of Corbett's head. Corbett did not turn around. He stood up very slowly, and he did it the way a man stands when his legs have decided something before he has. Marcus Corbett looked down at the file on the table in front of him. He had carried that file into 3 separate hearings in 8 days. He had argued from it in front of a magistrate on Wednesday. He had said the words "no weapon was recovered" out loud in this building with his own voice because a document with a badge number on it had told him so. Your Honor, he said, before anything else, I want to state something for the record, and I understand how it's going to sound. State it. I did not prepare this file. The people's case as presented to me consisted of a scene report, 2 officer statements, and a withdrawn victim statement. The property log is not in it. The hospital was never contacted. I was not told there was a knife. He put 2 fingers on the folder without picking it up. I want the record to reflect that I am learning the existence of that document at the same time as this court. Noted, Sloan said. Then the people moved to dismiss all counts. And I will say plainly that the people will not refile. Corbett straightened. There is no probable cause here, Your Honor. There never was. What there is a young man who was armed, who was disarmed by force in the course of an assault on a third party, and who is alive this afternoon for exactly one reason, that the man my office charged with attempted murder knelt down in an alley and kept him breathing until the paramedics arrived. Ruth Alvarado sat down. She had prepared for 2 more hours of this and did not need them. Sloan looked at the property log in his hand for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice had lost something that had been in it since 1 o'clock. The motion is granted. All counts against Mr. Keene are dismissed. The defendant is released forthwith, Mr. Keene. You will not be returned to custody, and the bailiff will process you out of this building this afternoon. He looked at the clerk. The court will refer the underlying investigation to the district attorney's public integrity unit, and I'm going to sign that order before I leave the bench today. Mason Keene put both hands flat on the defense table and lowered his head, and his shoulders went once, and he did not make a sound. In the first row, Harrison Langston stood up. He did not look at the bench. He did not look at Corbett, who had been until roughly 4 minutes earlier an instrument. He took his time buttoning his suit jacket, one button, unhurried the way a man does when the whole point is that his hands are steady. Then he turned and looked at Claire Donnelly. It lasted 2 seconds. It was not hatred, which would have been survivable, and even a little flattering. It was the look of a man performing an appraisal and arriving at a figure, and the figure was that she had cost him something, and that this was now a matter of record. Claire looked back at him. She had held pressure on a femoral artery for 19 minutes once, with a man's blood coming up between her fingers. 2 seconds was nothing. He walked up the aisle and out. The door closed behind him very quietly, and a man like that does not slam doors because slamming a door is what you do when you have run out of other options. Judge Everett Sloan took his glasses off. Then he did something that no one who had practiced in Department 2C had ever seen him do. He stood up. Not to leave, the clerk was still typing, the bailiff was still at the wall. He simply rose from the chair so that he was no longer speaking down at the woman in the witness box from a height and put both hands on the bench. Ms. Donnelly, I owe you an apology, and I'm going to give it to you here on this record where I did the thing I'm apologizing for. He did not clear his throat, and he did not look at his notes. I looked at you this afternoon, and I made a judgment about who you were, and every part of that judgment was wrong, and it was wrong for reasons I am going to be thinking about for a long time. I was rude to you. I threatened you with custody. I came very close to excluding the only honest evidence in this proceeding, and if I had, a man would have gone to trial for saving a life. There's no excuse available to me, so I'm not going to look for one. I'm sorry. He waited. Thank you, Your Honor, she said. The court thanks you for your testimony, Ms. Donnelly. He got her name right. He got it right the way a man does when he has decided to. And for your service. Mason Keene was on his feet by then, out from behind the table, the jumpsuit still on him, and the bailiff walking him toward the side door. He stopped at the rail. Whatever he had meant to say did not arrive. His mouth moved and nothing came, and after a moment he gave up on it and simply put his hand out. Claire took it with her left, the scarred one. She did not think about which hand she was using until afterward, and that more than anything else that happened in that room was the part she would remember. In the back row, the young woman in the cardigan stood up. Paige Moreno had been sitting there since 12:40 with a folded envelope in her lap, and she had not been called, and she had not been sure until about 4 minutes ago that she was going to do anything at all. She came up the center aisle past the empty seat in the first row and handed the envelope to the clerk, and her voice was not steady. It's my statement. The whole one. Everything I took back and why I took it back and who called me. She swallowed. I'd like it in the file, please. Sloan told her it would be in the file. The referral he signed that afternoon named the Langston family, and it named the 2 officers whose signatures appeared on a scene report filed at 2:58 in the morning that said no weapon had been recovered. It would take 11 months, and it would not be quiet. 2 people stood up in that courtroom. One of them stood to lose his dignity by standing. The other stood to lose her safety. They both stood anyway. Justice rarely arrives in a ruling. It usually arrives in one person deciding not to stay seated.